Cassie, it is awesome to see you. This is your second appearance in
I know.
less than a couple of months. Probably going to end up being at least a couple of weeks. But the last time you were on, we talked about air. We talked about a movie and lessons we take away from it that apply to business, life, and sales. And today we're going to talk about you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I must have done something right if I'm on a second time and within a short period. So thank you. I appreciate it. Honored as always to be here with you today, Mike.
You're fascinating. I think your view, like when I think of you, I think of someone who understands the strategic aspects of marketing, like what's the broader thing that we're looking to do, and then have the ability to convert that into specific tactics so that you can execute, which is really cool. And that's what you see when you get to work with practitioners, people who do the work, not just talk about the work. So I think you are awesome, and I can't wait to
Thank
get
you.
into the conversation. So I guess best place to start, you're doing something new. You're involved in launching a couple of different businesses, a couple of different things with Le Syrah, with Hennessy, getting the marketing thing going again on your own. What does it feel like to launch something new in the last, let's say, 90 days? Because that's, I think, the time frame. So in the last 90 days, you've been launching new things. What's it feel like to launch something new?
Yeah. Oh man, great question. And thank you for the kind words, by the way. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. No, it's an adventure. I'm sure you understand that. And if you listening have ever launched anything, you know the feeling of just having all of these ideas or goals for something and just kind of almost shooting your shot in the dark and not really quite sure what's actually going to happen once you actually launch it out there to the market. It's been an adventure for sure. It's a lot of testing, a lot of learning. I think the biggest thing, whether it's launching a podcast, a brand, a service-based business, a product-based business, is just to be open and be flexible, because we set these goals for ourselves. We have an idea of how we think things are going to play out. We have an idea for the plans and the steps we're going to take. But oftentimes, whether it's through customer feedback from mentors or people who have come before us who have done something similar and given us insight and feedback, you have to be open to pivot sometimes. So we've seen that a lot, where it's just been a lot of learning, a lot of growth, a lot of being humble and saying, I don't know everything. We're just going to try our best, but we're going to be open to kind of shifting and adjusting as needed. So that's kind of in a nutshell. But all of the different ventures I've been a part of recently and just up until this point in the past have been very different, but it's been very fun. And I think the silver lining, or the thread between all of them, is just the ability to help people or empower and support people through those different ventures. And that kind of looks different for all of them. But I'm honored and I'm very grateful for these different opportunities. And so we'll see what's ahead.
I think that's one of the really cool things about Le Syrah. And at some point, like, we should get you and Hennessy on to talk about Le Syrah. She will be. So there's this empowerment message around what she will be and what the future holds, and not where you are, but what you will be and where you're going, which is a really powerful driving force. Why do you think people struggle with the vision of the future and saying, hey, there's this thing that I'd like to do, I'd like to test, I'd like to go out and try something, but I just struggle with the nudge. I struggle with taking that first step. Why do people struggle with this?
Well, I think a lot about some of the stuff you talk about, Mike, and I imagine, a lot of what I've been working on recently, without the elements and kind of the strategies behind the game plan, for example, mindset, breaking goals down. I think I would be a little bit overwhelmed by all of these different things going on. Because for me, I used to get stuck in kind of the big picture. I look too big initially, and it's
Yeah.
hard to kind of figure out what the first steps are to get to that point unless you break it down. So I think the biggest thing that hinders someone from getting started, whether it's you're a woman, you're a man, whatever, and you have this goal ahead of you, but you're not quite sure what to do next, or you get stuck in the mindset of I'm not good enough, or I don't have the skills, I don't have the background, I don't have the knowledge to do that. And I think the biggest thing is that mindset factor. And then after that, the goal seems too large, which is kind of, a part of the mindset aspect. But it's okay, that sounds great, but what do I do to get there? I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what partners to reach out to, vendors. I don't know how to design on Illustrator. There's a number of different things. And so I think it takes a lot of taking one step back, first setting your game plan in front of you and saying, okay, what's just that first step I need to take to get to the next step, which all of those steps eventually lead up to that ultimate goal of launching your business or making your first $1,000 or whatever it is.
So what drove the move to New York back when you moved to New York?
Oh man. So that was for me. And let me tell you. So I grew up in Ohio and then I moved to Florida. And besides that, I did not go a ton of places new. We traveled growing up to the same places all the time. It was just very much a routine for us. We vacationed at the beach. That was it. I think for me, I really felt, I can't remember how old I was when I moved there, early 20s. I really felt kind of stagnant in my career where I was doing a lot of the same things. I was working in the same industry, and I knew in order to grow in my career, I had to make some sort of big change and take a next step. And still to this day, New York is seen as one of those places in marketing. If you really want to get crazy great experience and expand your horizons, that's one of the places to go. You can get a lot of that experience elsewhere, but that was, at least when I was at that age, that was the mecca of just talent and opportunities in the world of creative and marketing. And so I visited New York for the first time ever. And 2 weeks later, I had a job to move there. So I
Very
went
cool.
from 24 hours in the city. I was like, cool, like it. I went home, I applied for a job, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm doing this. So I moved. It was probably about 4 to 6 weeks after my first visit, but it was a huge opportunity. But I think it was just figuring out, again, what's that big picture for my career. And for at that point, that wasn't super clear to me. I knew I wanted to do bigger things and work on bigger projects and have bigger opportunities. But taking that step back, as we were talking about before, was okay, now I have to take the first step forward, the first mini step of building my experience for now so that I can get to that eventual goal.
What kind of support resources do you have in place when you made that shift or you made that change and you made the decision? It's like, hey, look, I'm in the city. This place is absolutely amazing. There's this feeling I get walking around to now I'm looking for opportunities. I'm applying for opportunities, and I know I've got an opportunity. What was the support resource like in the background in case you failed?
Yeah. So a couple things. I think for me, so I wasn't with my husband at that point, so definitely didn't have him around to
Yeah,
cheer me on. But two ways I would divide that out. One, I think, was mindset, going back to that, and number two was kind of that support system. So for me, it was friends and family. I only had one friend in the Manhattan area. She at the time was in Long Island, so she was close, but not, I couldn't walk down to her apartment in the city and just have an ear or shoulder to cry on if needed. But she was close enough. So I had that. And then I had my family back home. I could call them and kind of bounce ideas. I think the other thing was that mindset aspect. So going into it with kind of not knowing what to expect, but just being open to the learnings and the opportunities and the growth that could potentially come from that. And then, I had the luxury of having a team in person that I got to work with. I know a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we work from home or we don't kind of have that space where we have friends or people we can collaborate with on a regular basis. But for me, that was huge. Those relationships I was able to build. So I think having people, but also having the right mindset. I know mindset can wane. Unfortunately, we go through challenges, and I certainly had my share of challenges in the city. But I think going back to this aspect of, this isn't permanent. I'm here to test it out, try it, learn, grow as much as I can. If needed, I can always go home. But my goal was to to push it out as long as possible, get as much out of that experience, and just call up a friend or family member if needed.
So now, given the changes that you've had recently, so launching Cam Media, let's write the name correct. Cam Media,
Yeah.
writing, launching Cam Media, getting involved in Lace Raw, doing some of the other things that you're doing with like the Leadership Crucible. How has your perspective either on mindset or support changed or evolved since that first move to New York?
So I think the biggest thing is knowing that I don't have to have it all figured out immediately. Even leaving New York, I would get questions or statements shared with me, and people would say, "Oh, you probably know exactly what you want to do now, or you have it all figured out, or I'm sure you've learned so much that you could just do anything in your career." And I was like, sometimes I felt like that, sure. Like I felt so excited and so confident about what I took away from that experience. But I think the biggest thing, and I think this goes for no matter how old you are, just continuing to have that growth mindset, continuing to know that I still don't know it all. I'm still open to learning. I'm still open to learning from people who do these areas better than I do. And I think that's the biggest thing that I took away from that, because New York is almost like a culture shock to your professional system. You see all of these talented people who are going places, and you're like, wow, I thought I knew a lot being a little marketing director back in Tampa, Florida, but going into this new environment where you're open to new cultures and just new levels of expertise, it's really important. So I think I've taken that into just future opportunities of getting excited about new things that pop up, but going into it saying, I don't know everything about this area. I'm going to do the best that I can to research, to learn, to have conversations with people who do better than I do. And I think the growth mindset is a big aspect from that.
Let's shift into marketing and something that you know really well and that have a lot of deep experience in. What's changing in marketing today versus what might have been in place 2, 3, 5 years ago? What are some of the changes today that you're surprised or excited about specifically in marketing?
Great question. Wow. I think the biggest thing for me, one thing that I'm not excited about this, but it also provides an interesting opportunity for innovation, is that there's more and more brands out there doing really incredible things. There's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of content creators creating amazing content online. And so as a consumer, your feed is just filled with all of these different stories and messages and things. And so the space is definitely noisy. But I think for me, the exciting part is knowing that people are so creative nowadays, and there's really no stopping point for how creative and innovative you can get with your content. And we have so much technology available to us to where we can make a lot of awesome things happen and at a low cost now, to where you used to have to hire creative agencies and videographers, photographers to help bring these things to life. But we as entrepreneurs, for example, have a lot of availability to us in terms of what we can do and how we can create. And so I think that's a huge part of it. And then going back really quick to technology, we have AI out there now. We have all of these different tools that are making our jobs a lot easier. But we still have that lingering question of, are these technology platforms going to take away our jobs at some point? We're not really sure yet. But I think as a copywriter, for example, using a platform like ChatGPT, it really helps me lean into new creative ideas that are supplied from that platform. And so just efficient work is a lot more accessible. And that has saved me a lot of time, but also has allowed me to present even new ideas and more creative opportunities to my clients as well.
What are some of the other tools that you're excited about? You mentioned Chat GPT. What are some other tools that you're excited about?
So definitely a lot. I think, Threads, I don't know if I'd call Threads a tool. It is a tool for brands using it to promote their business. Threads has been an interesting one. I think, we saw it launch and it just completely took off and it was going crazy. I saw an article yesterday, though, that daily use on the platform started at 21 minutes a day and now is down to 6 minutes a day. So we definitely saw that hype and that excitement around the platform at first. And as people kind of get in there and start to use it, it's slowing down. So that's something I'm watching closely. ChatGPT is a huge one. Canva is one of my favorite platforms. And I think I use Canva every single day. I know that's a platform that's talked about all the time, but speaking of AI, they've implemented a ton of platforms or a ton of aspects of AI on their platform to allow people, again, just to stretch their creativity and get really innovative with creating content. And so that's something I've been watching closely, but I would say AI and Canva are two of my favorites. What about you, Mike? Because you've been doing a lot of testing with editing platforms and things like that.
Yeah, so this is more on the video side. So one of the things I'm using on the video side now is Camtasia with Audiate integrated into it. And I tested with Descript. I thought Descript was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. Doing things in the Camtasia suite, doing that inside Audiate, which is all part of TechSmith's stack, is really cool. Capsho is something that Jerry Dugan had pointed out for me, and I thought I've used that. That's helped Jen do with show notes. One of the risks associated with Capsho, though, and this will be awesome when it shows up inside the transcript, is that it makes it so that Jen doesn't have to listen to the episode. She can read the transcript, and there's some things that get lost in just simply reading the transcript. So I think of technology. One of the ways I like to look at technology is it enables humans to do better human things. Ideally, if that's the kind of technology that you're using, it doesn't do the thing for you. And if you are so dependent on the thing to do the thing for you, you're going to be limited on how you create, how you get creative, how you innovate. If you just like outsource the work to the tool rather than work together with the tool. And I think the same thing happens inside teams, inside organizations. So, Capsho is something that's interesting to me. Audiate with Camtasia is interesting to me. The technology that I bought recently that I think is most interesting is I got a new light, a light that actually has a fan built into it. I had no idea that lights like that actually exist. And I'm still working on the whole lighting, but I picked up like a spotlight from Newer. I don't even know what they call these things, but it's insane the amount of light that this thing pushes off. So there's both technology from software and SaaS perspective, but there's also hardware that is easily accessible. And I think that was one of the things that's been very interesting for me is how accessible a lot of the tech has gotten. We were together with Jody and he showed me his DJI lab mics. We purchased those and have used them for events and for recordings, better camera, better lighting. All of these things make the testing more accessible for folks if they have the right mindset to go out there and test. But enough about that. Like I want to get into the whole marketing side of things. Now shift to what are the fundamentals that have stayed the same? The kind of the tried and true things that people, for whatever reason, they want to try to shortcut or avoid because they think there might be a better way or a faster way to do something. But the reality is they just have to get really good at the fundamentals. What are some of those fundamentals that you see people either screw up on or areas where they can do better?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, something that has stood the test of time, I think, from the day marketing or this idea of promoting something was developed is a lot of times as business owners or even marketers within a big company, we think that we know how someone wants to be communicated with or how a message should be transmitted to the customer without even asking the customers or doing research on who your target market is. So I think the biggest thing that will continue to stay relevant forever is the importance of not just coming up with a creative idea and saying, this will work. Let me just run with this, but first of all, starting with a ton of research, do case studies, do surveys of your customers, ask them what they're looking for, what problems they have, and how you can provide a solution to them. But after you craft an idea or even a product or a service, test it on your customers and then ask them questions. Again, Mike, I have to call you out here, but one of the things you've done really well in the past is you'll do a session with someone and all you'll ask in return is a couple different questions about, did what I say make sense? Was it helpful? Was there anything else that you wish you got out of that session? And so asking those clarifying questions that can help you refine a message or a product or a service even further to make sure it really fits in with your customers and what they're looking for. Because we can assume all day long, but assumption is not going to get you far a lot of times in marketing. I think the other thing too is just unclear messages. So kind of along the same lines is nowadays, I mentioned creativity and how creativity, there's just sky's the limit on it. But the biggest thing that I think businesses get wrong is they try to be a little bit too cute or clever or fun with their message. And it ends up the clear message inside of that fun nature ends up getting lost and we confuse the customer. So I think really stating clearly what you do and how you provide a solution to them and communicating that across all of your different channels is going to be huge because people just want to know what's in it for them. They want to know exactly what they're going to get from you. And that's pretty much it. Customers and humans really are on this survive to thrive mode. And so they just want to know, what can you do or provide to me that's going to help me survive in an area of my life a little bit better? And then I think the other thing too is we don't spend a lot of times in branding enough time planning and creating a clear plan or strategy behind what we're doing. So a lot of times we say, oh, I want to launch this product or service or whatever it is. But we don't spend enough time thinking about how much time leading up to the launch do we want to communicate this launch to our customers? How do we want to build anticipation? And then once that product or service launches, what do we want to do out there in the marketplace to bring people in? And so really clearly defining exactly where you're going to communicate that message and how long and how often and what is the story behind that launch going to be, and making sure, once again, consistency, that is clearly and consistently communicated across those channels. And then outside of that, and kind of tying into that, is making sure you're analyzing. So once you do develop a plan, set a plan in place for how often you're going to analyze the traction and the growth of that idea, and making sure you're checking your data. Data is your best friend in marketing. So looking at what specific posts or content pieces or messages are driving people to your main conversion point as often as possible. And if things aren't, if they're not working, being open to pivoting. Because again, we talked about complacency, not saying this is what I'm going to do and I'm not going to change it, but saying we're going to test this. And if we need to kind of switch up what we're doing, we will certainly do that. But I think just being humble with your ideas and being willing to adjust and say, if something doesn't work, I'm open to shifting quite a bit.
I think and this is an area that you've really helped me, and you've helped Jen, and you've helped Sean on all of these things in one way, shape, or form. Me relative to some of the Catalyst messaging in general, Jen relative to what we're doing related to Catalyst Acts and the game plan, and Sean and Jen relative to what we're doing from a Fairways Hit perspective. So we've got a couple of different things that are out there, all different tests. We're trying to be a catalyst for change, impact others, get people to smile when it comes to the Fairways Hit stuff, or get people to achieve things when it comes to some of the specific items around game plan. We would not be able to do, I personally would not be able to do a lot of the things that I'm doing and that we're doing relative to the language in the business had it not been for you. And that those conversations that we can have, that outside perspective. I'm so stuck in it inside my own head. And I expect that there are a lot of really excited entrepreneurs out there, founders who are building new things, who are just so stuck in their head around this. What are some questions that people can ask of themselves to kind of break through and say, hey, am I really stuck in my own head? Am I getting outside enough perspective from others? What are some things to do to kind of break through this piece of the blind spots that I've got for myself because I'm so deep in the business and so deeply committed to the things that I'm doing rather than figuring out whether or not I'm actually saying them in a right way that attracts more people. So
Yeah.
what's a good question I could ask if it, think of me 6 months ago. What's a really good question that I should have asked back then that I'm starting to ask better now?
Yeah. Well, I think outside of questions, which I'll get to that in a second, I think
Yeah.
the biggest thing that, and I'm definitely guilty in this, and I find myself doing this often at times, but I think we try to work through an idea and just push it too hard without stepping away and kind of letting it breathe. It's hard too, because I know a lot of times, depending on your personality, you may be the type of person who has to sit down and complete a project to its finishing point without walking away, or you get frustrated and you don't allow that creativity or the new ideas to push through that frustration. So I think number one thing I would recommend when you do get in this point of just being stuck and feeling like something isn't quote unquote not working, just to walk away from it and give it some space, allow it to breathe. And I think with that too, again, asking the right questions, not only to yourself. Some things, for example, is number one, do I know who this is going to serve right off the bat? Is that clear? Do I have kind of an audience persona for this product or service? And you can have multiple of these, but essentially when we say persona, it's what does that person do for a living? How much money do they make? What challenges do they face on a regular basis? What social media platforms do they hang out on? What are they looking for in their life to make their life a little bit easier? And so if you ask yourself, do I have that clearly defined? And the answer is no. I would first, before trying to craft any sort of message or a marketing strategy, is take a step back and look through that first. Because a lot of times when we know exactly who we're speaking to, some of the messaging and some of the other elements are a lot easier to pull together. And then I think bottom line too is we talked about message clarity. Ask yourself, is this clear? And if it's clear to you, awesome. And that's fine. But then ask yourself, have I checked that this is clear to others? And again, if the answer is no, make sure you go out there and do that testing of that message with others. And I think the biggest thing to mention here too, yes, test it on your wife, your husband, your close friends, but also go out and find that customer that you identified when you were building your audience personas and ask them too, because your wife or husband or close friend may not be your target market. And they may look at that and say, great job, Mike. I love what you have here, but they don't have anything else to add context wise. And so asking that person who is the person you'd be selling to, does this make sense? Okay. Yes, it does. Great. But then again, after that step, making sure that the product or service helps them solve whatever problem they're looking for. So clarity, but also testing the product or service itself and making sure that's an actual solution that they need or that could work for them in whatever problem you're solving.
What I love is the highlight back as you're going through this, and it kind of goes into this arc of, hey, I'm going to change. I'm going to go move to New York because I've got an opportunity. But there's this comfort in testing things, gathering feedback, making some changes, testing again, gathering feedback, making some changes, testing again, and continuing to move forward rather than just getting stuck in this mode of come hell or high water, I'm going to figure out a way to get this thing in front of you today. And this is the thing you need, even though you don't think you need it. This is the thing you need, which reminds me of, Sisyphus, that, the dude who just kept pushing the rock up a hill
Mm-hmm.
only to have it roll back on top of them. Very, very powerful stuff. One of the other questions that I've got around strategy is, how do you create alignment between marketing and sales? And then that other piece that you had mentioned, success, like how the customer is successful. So how do you think about that alignment between marketing and sales and success?
Yeah. So, ultimately, when building out a marketing strategy, you're going to have a number of different goals outlined for whatever it is you're building, a launch of a product, a launch of a service, a launch of a business in general. And and so I think a lot of times in marketing, we as professionals, we build out our goals for marketing, and examples of goals for marketing could be how many followers do we want to build our audience to? How
Sure.
many, what conversions are we looking for? Whatever. And we keep it in this marketing bubble. But I think the biggest thing we need to do, and whether you have a large team or it's just you and one other person, it's just a couple people, is not only defining those marketing goals, but defining the goals of the company as a whole, defining what your sales goals are, and making sure all of those are aligned and they're communicating with each other. Because I think we can get stuck in this rotation of, oh, I'm just looking for followers, or I'm just looking for email subscribers, or what have you, but we lose sight of what the sales goals are, our revenue goals are, our company growth goals are, et cetera. And so making sure that those items are communicating, because I know there was this thought once upon a time that marketing sales was the same thing, and that they didn't really, there was no clear definition between the two of them. But making sure that, again, you're educated on how each of those functions should work and what you need to do to build out each of those areas to ensure you have a clear funnel for a customer, you have retention strategies, you have strategies for building referrals. And so all of these pieces are communicating together. And sales is something, for example, how I mentioned there is a clear definition. Sales is something I'm certainly not as comfortable in. Mike, we've talked about this before, but it's something I know as a marketer, I need to learn more about, and how to convert a customer from acquisition point to actually conversion, and how do I communicate to them clearly so that we do land a sale. But it's an interesting world, and something I'm still figuring out on my own, because I come from the luxury of agency life where we had people who managed that side of things and I didn't have to touch it. But I think that's the issue of where marketers don't spend enough time learning about that, and seeing where the overlap is and how those communicate.
What do you think are some assumptions that sales leaders make about marketing that just aren't true?
So one of the biggest issues, and I'm curious if you heard this before, Mike, but one thing that there's this notion in the world of marketing that marketing is one of the first things to go. When sales are down, marketing it gets cut, whether it's budget or team or whatever. I think a lot of times the assumption is that marketing is just to have fun, and it's just to create content that people enjoy. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I do see that opinion change depending on the industry or the company. But I think what I said a second ago is true on the sales side too, that sales needs to understand the function of marketing, and how, marketing is a big driver of acquisition and new awareness for a brand. So how do you take that function, pair it with the sales function to lead to more revenue for your business? Because I think that's been unclear in the past. So, go talk to marketers, understand how you can complement each other. And I would also recommend, while it might be easy to point blame at marketing when sales are down, just having conversations and figure out how you can work together better.
I think one of the biggest challenges we run into inside organizations, and you said about my experience there. One of the biggest challenges we run into in organizations is we forget there's one person or organization, depending on if you're selling B2C or B2B, that goes through every one of those channels, whether we're talking about the strategy around marketing, or we're talking about the strategy around sales, or we're talking about the strategy or interaction on the success side. There's one person or organization that goes through the whole thing, and it's the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we fall into this trap of getting so excited about the stuff that we're doing, and sharing our perspective and talking about it through this lens, that we forget to bring in that customer perspective and look at it through their eyes. And I know a lot of people will talk about empathy, and yet if you ask them if they went in and they actually secret shopped their organization, they probably haven't. Have they gone through the
Mhm.
actual process of mapping out that customer journey? What did that actually look like? Did they test it against other things? Did they actually show it in front of a customer on a whiteboard and walk through and say, is this how you went from problem unaware to problem aware to solution unaware to solution aware to solved problem? I think that's one of the big challenges we run into inside organizations. And unfortunately, when money becomes tight inside companies, people will start to put up even bigger walls and start to defend the empires that they've built. So
Mhm.
sales will defend the fact that it's generating revenue, and marketing is just spending a lot of money and struggles with things like attribution and
Yeah.
all of that other kind of stuff. Or the success side of things will be, well, we're just really reactive inside things and we really need to bring in more customers, so we're going to tone down success. And the reality is, once you have a customer, it's significantly simpler to maintain that customer and keep that customer. It's not necessarily easy, or all of this
Mhm.
stuff is still hard, but it's not as complex. Retaining a customer is not as complex as bringing on a customer, and
Yeah.
not as complex as getting a customer to even realize that you exist. So I think one of our big challenges is we get into that situation where money starts to become tight. We become biased around defending and protecting our team, defending and protecting our territory, defending and protecting our perspective. And we forget there's only one reason our business still exists, unless we're on the investment train and we just keep getting funding
Mhm.
over and over again, or we're
Right.
independently wealthy. There's one reason our business exists. It's because we've had an opportunity to serve customers. And I think if we ask those questions, we can actually get aligned pretty well inside the organization and say, hey, you know what, our customers are actually pretty important to us. Maybe we should understand wants, needs, desires, all of those kinds of things. So really,
Right.
really powerful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that goes back to humility, right? So knowing I do know a lot, maybe I'm very talented at what I do, whether it's in sales or marketing, but knowing that there's also more to learn in this area. And ultimately, like you said, Mike, I'm serving the customer. I'm not serving myself. So while I think I like the idea or I like the product or service or business, ultimately I am serving that target market. And so asking those questions if something doesn't work, instead of thinking internally that you know how to solve for that challenge, go out and ask people, hey, why didn't you buy? Or why didn't you buy more of these? Or why didn't you buy again? And I think a lot of times there's a simple answer behind that, and we can make a small shift without, running around like the building's on fire, essentially. Well, as we close out here too, or before we close out, I should say, I do have a question for you. Is there anything in your business or just past endeavors that you've worked on that you feel like is the biggest missing piece in marketing, or the biggest question you have, or problem you're trying to crack?
So, in the context of things I suck at, this is how I'll answer that question. One of the things I really suck at is connecting dots, or filling in the spaces between the dots that I automatically connect on my end and helping others kind of work along that piece. So that's one thing that I've consistently struggled at. When I'm engaged one-on-one with someone and I can look into their eyes and we can engage on camera or in person and we build together, that it feels supernatural for me. But when I'm not in the room, I have a really hard time not jumping too far ahead, not jumping 3 steps ahead when someone needs to really go through step one, step two before they get to step three. So that's one thing that I struggle with. The other one I struggle with is there's all of these different opinions around what you should do, and whether it's related to long drawn out single landing pages, or that
Mm-hmm.
constantly scroll, or having big hero images, and like this visually appealing piece that's out there to help draw people in to a conversation that feels and conveys a message of clarity, a message of confidence, a message of, hey, this may work for you, this may not work for you, but
Mm-hmm.
in the process, we're going to figure it out. And then at least you'll
Right.
know this is why this thing didn't work out, or this is what I need to do differently in order to make it work out. Like that kind, those, there's got to be a visual way, a visual storytelling component to all of this that can do those things. So there's the narrative and kind of the back and forth of what happens when I'm not in the room. How do we better communicate that? There's a visual piece about how do you draw people in. And then the third one is how do we really simplify our approach to things like, I hear people talk about SEO, but I don't really, I can say search engine optimization, but I don't really understand what that means. Keyword research, what needs to go into that, how you load things with keywords to bring people together, all of this stuff. It just seems like wizardry that's out there that I get lost in. So those are my big three things: communication when I'm not in the room, visual storytelling, and the technical aspect of drawing people and attracting people.
Yeah, so a couple small bits I'll share on each of those. So number one, I think we have the luxury of utilizing video heavily across all different channels. And so whether it's on your website or throughout social media, if you are a person who you feel that your ideas come across best when you're talking to someone face to face, obviously someone's going to land on your website and you may not have the luxury of getting to speak with them. So what are different things you can implement across your website or on social media to clearly communicate those ideas to them? And I think the benefit of that also is that that gives people the opportunity to build trust with you if they're seeing your face and they're hearing you speak and they're getting to know you. The thing I'll say on imagery and just visuals overall of a website, I think the biggest challenge we marketers have is that we, like you said, we kind of push these ideas. We say, you need this, you have to have this, or else you're not going to be successful, yada, yada, yada. That goes back to the humility point we were talking about,
Yeah.
where sure, we know best practices and we know what a business should be doing. But the biggest thing that we have to understand is each audience is different. The way that someone, reviews information and takes in information is different. And so just knowing different standards of practice for customers, but also knowing that the way that looks for my business may be different from another business. We can't get into that comparison trap of saying, well, this other sales company or this other product-based business is doing this, so I have to do it in order to be successful. That might be true, it might not be. But I think going back to just visuals, the biggest thing to know about customers nowadays is attention span is so limited. So the number one thing is, sure, imagery and copy is important, but the biggest thing is, are you communicating an idea as quickly as possible and as straightforward as possible? Because people will jump off of your website in about 2 seconds if they don't get that right away. And what that looks like imagery wise can vary depending on the business. And last thing here for keywords and SEO, SEO is a big thing thrown around in the world of marketing all the time. And I think the biggest thing on the business side that the challenge that business owners have is they think that stuff is going to kick in immediately. And it is certainly a long game. And so just doing the best you can to research what some of the things your customers are looking for, how they're searching that on Google and all of these different search engines, and making sure that you are infusing some of that, whether it's through FAQs and answering core questions customers are asking or whatever, but having those keywords. And there's a couple different tools, Google Keyword Planner is a good one, but Answer the Public is another one. So it allows you to kind of see those common questions that customers are asking around your relevant industry. So the biggest thing I'll say around all of these is just testing, just trying different things, get creative with how you communicate and where you communicate and what you say. And once things start to stick, give things time to breathe and to test them. Don't make a decision 2 days in that you're going to switch it up. Give it time to kind of play out. But if you need to pivot, just be open to pivoting and just continue testing new things.
Cassie, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you. I've got a couple of tools I want to look into. I have some questions I'll probably hit you up with afterwards. Where should people go to find out more about what you're working on and connect with you directly?
Yeah, thank you for asking. This has been wonderful. So thanks again for having me, Mike. But LinkedIn is my favorite social media platform. So find me Cassie Tucker on that platform. And I have a new-ish website I'm kind of still working on, but if you want to kind of check it out while it's still in its working phase, marketingwithcassie.com. And it's kind of an iteration of my G.A.M.E media business that you mentioned earlier, Mike. But yeah, grateful to be here. And thanks so much for letting me have a conversation on the show today.
If you know somebody who would enjoy this conversation, get some value out of the information that Cassie shared, please share it with them and let us know via LinkedIn. If you tag us, then we know that the share has happened, and then we'll be able to respond to some of the questions that come up. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?